In late 1940, a group of young men from western Michigan were called to serve their country. Like their fathers and grandfathers before them, they were part of the Michigan National Guard units. They served in the Civil War and were victorious against the Germans in World War I. Their victories earned them the distinctive name of Red Arrow for forcefully penetrating into enemy lines. As they marched down the streets of their hometowns of Grand Rapids and Holland, they carried the flags of the 126th Infantry Regiment. Shortly after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Japanese Imperial Army that had successfully invaded the Philippines, viciously conquered Singapore, and controlled two-thirds of China set their sights on the conquest of Australia. General Douglas MacArthur, Commander-in-Chief of the Southwest Pacific, needed American troops to supplement the sparse Australian forces desperately fighting in New Guinea against the superior forces of Japan. With no training in jungle warfare and no experience in battle, the young men of Michigan's National Guard were mobilized to conquer the heretofore undefeated Japanese Imperial Army in the harsh malaria-ridden jungles of New Guinea.
I was selected by my friends and neighbors. I got a letter one day. Uncle Sam wants you.
And there was no jobs. And Colonel Hayes was in charge of the guards at that time. And he knew my folks, and he said, why don't you come down and I'll put you to work. He says, you can join the guards and you can make $1 a week.
Just like any other young guys. I mean, I didn't want to have my mother and dad tell me when to get in and so forth. Well, I learned the hard way. I went in service, and then I had some guy telling me when to get up, when to go to bed.
They all were, the whole neighborhood was in, they joined various companies. We had about 15 kids around there, they all signed up.
The A company was from Coldwater, B company was from Adrian, C company from Kalamazoo, D company from Holland, E company was Big Rapids, G company was Muskegon, F company was Grand Haven, H company was Ionia, then M, I, L, and K were from Grand Rapids.
They were in the National Guard and they were getting ready to go to Camp Grayling for 2 weeks. And to me, camp sounded pretty good. They had a Lake Marguerite at Camp Grayling, where they could go swimming, and the government fed them and they gave them clothes, and I thought that was a pretty good deal. But I was only 16.
I had a dad who was a perfectionist. Had a very difficult time pleasing him. I knew there was no possibility that we were going to be on the same page or the same network. And that contributed somewhat because it gave me a comfort zone. And I had to prove something to myself.
The fellas that helped me get in, they figured if I signed up on a Friday and once I signed the papers, Saturday and Sunday came along, nobody bothered about it because they all wanted the weekend off, so I was in. So I did. I signed up on Friday, and I figured I was in. By Monday morning, we were mobilized.
We left in the evening and marched down the steps from the armory, and it's about a 3-block tour to the depot where we marched downtown, down Main Street, and crowds lined the street like it was tulip time.
That's a complete change in my life and my future. Not knowing then at that time it was only a year's draft, 12 months.
They told us that you want to go right now and get your year in, you can go for a year and come back and evade the draft this way. So most of us just said, we'll go now. And in fact, I planned on getting married. So then I said to my wife-to-be, well, I'll go and put my year in now, and then after I come back, we can get married. And she said, okay, so I went away for the year, we thought. And it was 5 years later we came back.
The Red Arrow Division was one of the first National Guard units to be called up to active federal service at the start of World War II. As a National Guard unit, they were not required to serve outside of the Western Hemisphere or for more than 12 months anywhere else. It took a congressional bill to relax the restrictions and extend the service dates of the Red Arrow Division. This bill was passed in August 1941 by a slim one-vote margin. With the passing of this bill, the men of the Red Arrow Division were sent to train at Camp Beauregard, Louisiana. In February 1941, they were sent to Camp Livingston, Louisiana.
We were federalized on October 15th, 1940. And from there we went to Beauregard, Louisiana for training.
The government wanted us to train for the European war, so it was continual hard training.
We faked a lot in those days, and by that I mean we didn't even have weapons. So if we didn't have weapons, obviously we didn't have ammunition.
It was more or less something based on what the officers went through World War I.
For civilian type countries where you go from city to city using highways and side roads.
Hills, valleys, woods, open fields, rivers. That's what we were trained for. We didn't have a clue of what a jungle was like.
Camp Beauregard wasn't ready for us. It was just a damn big field. And we had tents, and then they finally got to Camp Livingston, which was about 15 miles down the road. And we had bathrooms and whatnot there.
There was a lot of discipline then. In fact, if a corporal told you to do something, boy, you jumped up and he says, right now.
First morning, they called us out. They said, pick up them cigarette butts. I said, I don't smoke. The sergeant said, pick them up.
We had our first full field inspection, and the lieutenant came out, and he'd come up to you, and he stood right in front of you, and he'd look you right in the face, and he looked at me, and I thought, uh-oh. And he says to me, when was the last time you shaved? And, you know, that struck me so funny. I busted out laughing. And he called me a few choice words. And he put me on KP for a week.
KP, washing dishes and peeling. That was the worst job.
I reported in the morning. One of the cooks said, go in the pantry, get that bag of potatoes. It was a 100-pound bag of Idaho potatoes. God, they were beautiful. He said, peel them. He gave me 2 great big pots. I said, how many should I peel? He said, that whole bag. So I peeled that whole bag. They cooked them for dinner. And I liked that because I could go in a pantry, get milk, you know, or apple, or orange, whatever I wanted to eat.
And he called my squad leader, who was Adrian Bush, and he told him to take this thing out to the bathhouse and teach him how to shave. And that's where I knew I was accepted. I thought that was the greatest thing ever happened to me. Somebody told me to learn how to shave.
It seems like the 6 weeks went real quick. I knew one of the sergeants, Sergeant Marin, worked at the phone company. He was a National Guardman. So when I got down to I Company, he called me up to the first sergeant's tent and said, Bolt, he says, we want you for a BAR gunner. I says, what's a BAR? He says, well, it's an automatic rifle. It weighs about 20 pounds. And he said, it's got a tripod. He said, you'll learn about it. So I went out to a training ground, and the lieutenant stood out there telling me all about a BAR. And he said, the average life of a BAR gun is 6 seconds in action. I said, oh, he made a mistake. He means 6 minutes. So I waited till the presentation was over, and he says, any question? I raised my hand, yeah. I said, you said the average life of a gunner is 6 seconds? And I said, I think you meant minutes. He said, no, I said right.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
Somebody was hollering that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. We got into our tent. The cots were gone. The mattresses were piled up in the tent. We were told to get our stuff and meet at the company street.
Well, war was declared on December 7th. Then we were ready to go to Europe. But so they sent us to Boston, Camp Devens.
Well, MacArthur wanted the 1st Division that was ready to ship, and that was us. We turned back, got on trains, and headed right back to San Francisco.
We didn't know where we were going. Europe was out of the question once we left Massachusetts. And going to California, you know, I don't know, I thought maybe we would be more or less guarding the coast. Never had any idea that we're going overseas.
We'd never heard of Australia, and much less New Guinea.
They took us to the pier, and there was this luxury liner, the SS Lurline. And man, we looked at that, and that's a huge ship. And it was white. We were the first troops that boarded it.
We got on a little, we had about 5,000 troops on that ship. And the 127 and 128, they were on 2 other ships about the same size. But the Lurline, I think, was the largest ship.
Ironically, it was April 22nd when I boarded it. 1 year and 1 day in service.
And we left the harbor there. It was just getting dusk. And it was, the waves were about 20 feet high. And the boat was going like this. And you ever seen everybody seasick? Well, if you didn't get seasick, you watch these guys throwing up, you would get seasick.
We had been out for 3 or 4 days heading southwest, and there was some talk that speculation we were going to Hawaii, which would have been nice, and suddenly for a matter of 2 or 3 days, we headed straight east. And you could tell because of this, where the sun came up. And I thought that was rather unusual. I thought maybe the war had been canceled because of lack of interest or something.
Well, these sailors are superstitious guys, you know. And they come around and bet that we never hit Australia, never make it. And then started making bets with us. So I figured, if we're going to make it, what do I got to lose? So I think I made around $20 off of them. We got into Adelaide, Australia. They sure hated to pay us.
The New Guinea campaign began in mid-1942 when the Japanese attempted to take Port Moresby, a key Australian base on the island. New Guinea is located 80 miles to the north of Australia. Its estimated population in 1942 was 100,000 people, most of whom were indigenous people who had little to no contact with the modern world. The Australian Home Defence Organisation had 2 components, the Permanent Forces, or the Regular Army, and the Citizen Military Forces, or the Militia. All of the Australian troops in New Guinea were in bad shape by the time the Americans arrived.
The 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 126th Infantry were involved with the first airlift into a combat zone in the history of the U.S. Army. There had to be an officer on each airplane. I was assigned 2 airplanes because my platoon couldn't possibly fit in one. The other was the Golden 8 Ball. And The chaplain and I were standing side by side, and I said, "Chaplain, I think I'm going to go on the Flying Dutchman." And he said, "Why don't we flip a coin?" Which we did, and he went on the Flying Dutchman, and I went on the Golden 8 Ball, and the Flying Dutchman crashed about a half an hour after they were airborne into the jungles. But out of the, I think, original 29, including the crew, there were eventually 6 survivors in 2 groups. The rest either were killed on impact or had broken arms and legs. A couple of them went looking for water or some semblance of a trail and never were heard from again. Those who did stay near the airplane died one at a time.
They needed somebody there in a hurry, so they flew us up. They were the first company to ever fly into combat.
The rest of us went by ship from Brisbane, Australia.
The 127 and the 128 came up behind us. We were the spearhead of the spearhead.
They drop that gate, you go off that, and you're in water about chest high, so you have the gun over your head. Oh, you're dead meat if somebody's there, because all they got is your chest and your head to shoot at.
There was a ship that had been sunken in the harbor, and it was right next to where we docked. So the reality of it all of a sudden came into our minds that we were here.
Well, we knew there was going to be somebody was going to die up there. At least we should have known that.
There was quite a few Japs in New Guinea already, but some of the Australian soldiers were there already, and when we went over there, we joined the Australian soldiers. They helped us a lot.
This Australian or somebody brought a Jap up, and they're taking a prisoner, and they were taking him back to Australia. And this Aussie come over. He says, "Step aside, Yank." And the guy said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to shoot that bastard." And I didn't like that at all. And he shot him. I didn't go for that.
The very first night we were in New Guinea, we were bombed, and we had been told to dig foxholes. And I figured, well, I'm a lieutenant, somebody will do it for me. Until the first or second bombing, and there was a lieutenant colonel with a pickaxe digging a hole in the shale. And I thought, well, if he can do it, I guess I have to do it too.
They were trying to bomb us or the airport. I think it was mostly the airstrip. And we would sit there and hold our heads up watching them. Geez, pretty soon our neck would get stiff. You know. Somebody decided, well, we'll lay down and we'll have to bend our necks. And that got along all right. And then about 2 days or 3 days later, they missed the airport. And when the daisy cutters come down, and about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was sleeping. And I woke up, I was up in the air. Everything was red around me. And that blast you could hear, you couldn't believe it. I couldn't hear for a while.
A bomb hit the tree and shrapnel come down, and eventually 3 of those boys were killed, or died from that.
I come down the ground, and you could hear a lot of the guys got screaming and hollering. They got really bad, cut up bad. This one guy by the name of Fletcher, he lost his kneecap. And we had a doctor here from Grand Rapids. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was one of the bravest guys I ever saw. I helped him. I had a whole tourniquet on him and took the kneecap right off. And burnt flesh is stinking, and he was the guy who was crying.
Fletcher, he was laying on his back, and he had his knee raised up, and it took his knee off. He lost his leg there, and he disappeared from our view after that.
I come to this one guy, and he was cut up so damn bad. He just begged me. He says, he'll shoot me. Man, geez, I looked at him, and I started pulling my pistol out. And I almost had it out of there. And I said, no, damn, I ain't gonna do it. So I hollered for a medic, and the medic got over there.
General MacArthur and the Australian commander of the New Guinea force, General Sir Thomas Blamey, decided that while the Australians were driving the Japanese back along the Kokoda Trail, the 32nd Division would make an attack from the east and flank the enemy's left side at Buna. The initial plan was to march the entire division over the Owen Stanley Mountains, but the 32nd's general, General Harding, successfully argued for the troops to be transported by air in order to ensure speed and avoid weakening the strength of the division. The final plan involved both marching over the mountains and going by air to the southeast of Buna.
When we got orders to go on the Kokoda Trail over the mountains.
I can't believe that they thought that they would walk us all the way from Port Moresby to Buna, which was 125 miles as the crow flies. I mean, that would be kind of stupid, I thought. But it happened. It took a long time.
You grabbed a hold of a tree and pulled yourself up and just kept on going. You slung your rifle across your back and you kept your cartridge belt, but you threw away everything that you didn't need.
I didn't throw nothing away. Some of the guys, when we went to New Guinea, they threw a lot of stuff away, but I carried half the pup tent and all the muskets and the spoon and knife and fork. And
we didn't bathe, we didn't shave. I didn't shave for over almost 3 months. Everybody grew a beard because the beard kept the mosquitoes not off your face.
The Japs were halfway up the trail. It took them 49 days. Well, when they secured the area and the Japs are in retreat, they flew us up to Dubador and we landed there. We flew in 40 hours, but it took them 49 days to go.
My company commander left me in charge of the dropping area. That's where we got our food. And so then I had to stay there. I and a few other guys from my outfit had to stay there until the entire 2nd Battalion came through and picked up their supplies. That's how we got our supplies, just by airdrop.
Coming to a village, the people knew we were coming, the natives. They moved their women right out of there and the kids. I think they were abused by the Japanese and they wanted no part of any outsider coming in.
There was a flat area in a native village called Pangani, which was on the side of the mountain. And they had to take their machetes and chop grass until it was smooth enough for us to land.
The first thing we seen was wounded on a stretcher. They had carried him back that far, and some of them were come back on a jeep on a trail that was built. And we knelt down and talked to the guys that were wounded. And that was our first taste of what it was like ahead.
The natives were great. They call them the Angels of Mercy up there in front, because they would take these wounded people and carry them back to the aid stations to get patched up.
We would send letters, if you wanted to call that, notes to our parents or some guys' wives with the natives back to Port Moresby. We never knew if they got there or not.
they carried ammunition and grub for us.
The closer we got to the Japanese, we were hesitant to use the natives in any way because we didn't know if they were working for the Japanese or if they were friendly to us.
Once we got out of that clearing and got into the jungle, and the path towards Buna was maybe the width of man and a half, 2 feet or so.
The trails are terrible. Sometimes you get on a trail, you climb all day on roots, like climb up a ladder.
Since you had to pull yourself up on trees or vines or whatever there, and chopped out steps that the natives had made a long time before we arrived.
When you're coming through the fields, it was nothing but mud, and it rained every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then again at night, about 11 o'clock.
The higher up you got, the more it rained all the time. You couldn't even light a fire to warm your food. You ate it cold.
They call them sea rations. I called them dog biscuits. I broke my teeth on them things. They were harder than a rock. And then they had canned stuff, cans of meat. I said to the guys, that's horse meat.
Whatever you did have, you couldn't cook it, you couldn't eat it.
We didn't have latrines, nothing. In fact, half the time we didn't even have water.
We were drinking this water, come to find out there was some dead Japs in the stream up ahead of us. But this wasn't isolated. This was common.
We had denims, blue denims, one set that we started out with.
We had these old Army coats that hung down to your ankles. We had Army wools on. We had winter underwear even.
As I recall, I wore the same clothes all the way over for 50 days or however long I was on the trail. That's a long time to wear some underwear. We washed it out in the rivers and streams when we'd get to it, you know, but lived like animals.
Your clothes actually started rotting off you.
So he's standing there with burlap for pants, no shirt on, 2 bandoliers of ammunition, a rifle, his hair hanging down to here and a big beard. I said, I wish I had a camera. Nobody will ever believe this. You're an American soldier.
When your hands are bare and your wrists are exposed from your shirt on down, you're pretty raw in the morning when mosquitoes went to work on you. And since the Anopheles mosquito was obviously prevalent, how do you avoid malaria? There's just no way.
Every imaginable disease that you would catch in the jungle, we start getting it.
Tropical ulcers, which is external, legs, typhus, hookworm, ringworm, I don't know what else is there, jaundice.
When you get malaria, you've got 105 or whatever fever you got, you're sweating, your clothes are saturated, you're soaking wet, and you're freezing to death. And you know, they'll put blankets on you, they'll put 10, 12, 15 blankets on you, and it makes no difference. You're freezing to death. And then all of a sudden, you're so hot, you have to take these covers off, and you're sweating, and before you know it, you're getting delirious. And between sweating and freezing and delirium, you pass out.
Doyle, Skipper Doyle, we call him in our company, he has the jungle rot so bad you can see the bone. It's like big as $50.
I had jungle rot all up both my legs, up this side and down the left leg. I had malaria and I had black water fever, which was an extended form of malaria as I understand it. And I was told afterward that's 95% fatal.
Different insects that was get into your clothing and into your skin.
They'd get on your legs and get in your skin. And boy, some of the guys, they'd scratch, but I had a little bottle of alcohol, and they gave us a thing with, it was a compass on top with matches. I had matches. I'd light a match and touch that tick and it'd back out. Then I'd take the alcohol and just rub it on my legs and it'd heal.
When we were walking over the Owen Stanley Mountains, on some dropping areas, we would spend an extra day to rest up. And at one of these spots, the planes came over and dropped some supplies and also dropped a bag of mail. And in that mail, there was a V-mail for me from my mother-in-law that I was the father of a baby girl born on September 12. And as I recall, that was my birthday, November 9, that I got that V-mail.
The Battle of Buna began in November 1942 and was part of the New Guinea campaign, one of the longest and most grueling campaigns fought by the United States ground forces in World War II. The possession of Buna would free Australia from the imminent threat of Japanese invasion and give the Allies their first toehold in the Southwest Pacific.
Our greatest concern going over the trail was the Japanese.
And after a few days, just before we hit the front line, some of the fellas started throwing away their rifles, their pistols. It was too heavy to carry.
Through mud and rain and water over the mountains. And then we had to walk 11 days to get to Buna.
We were told that we're going to have to take Buna. And of course, us being Americans, you know, you figure, well, we're Americans. Not going to be a big problem. But we found out in a hurry that it would be.
I come across a path that was cut. It was cut like way down low. And I said, why am I going through this tall grass? Now I can see where I'm going. So I start crawling down this path, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that this is not a path. And at the other end of it is a machine gun trained on me.
They had their fire lanes, and by fire lanes I mean that machine guns are taught to cross like this so that if you're going to get somebody sooner or later.
I got to the other side and I knew I was hit, and I'm laying on my arm. And all I could think of, how bad am I hit? I knew I was hit. And it turned out it was just a minor flesh wound. I've still got it right there.
When you're in grass that's 6 to 8 feet high and you're trying to get through it, you don't have a clue when you're going to be able to get through without being detected.
So then we went up through the tall grass, but it got so bad we had to pull back. We lost a couple men there.
There, the natives had a sense. They could sense Japanese planes long before we could. When they started to run, you took cover. Well, Neil and I were standing there, and he dove one way, I dove the other, and we found part of his foot. So it must have landed right between his legs. So
I was looking for a place where the banana leaves was an opening to put our mortar in. The lieutenant came by, his name was Johnson. He says, don't put it in there, the planes come by, they can see you. Get under a banana leaf. And at training, they said never put it under a tree because that shell goes up, it hits the least little thing, it'll go off. So that lieutenant was going to court-martial me and the guy that was in the hole with me. He was a corporal. And I said, okay, I'll put it under the tree. I'll show you how to drop it. And you drop it and I'll leave and I'll tell your wife what happened to you. He walked away and didn't say a word.
I just walked across the trail, not maybe 100 yards, and chatted with some of my buddies from Holland. I went back to my unit, and within 10 minutes, 12 of them were killed. Just happened to get hit by a Japanese Navy barrage, and you know, I was that close to being there with them.
We was afraid of the Japanese snipers. We was afraid of the Japanese artillery because we had more people wounded and killed with treetop explosions rather than direct.
The very first casualty I saw, the first Japanese casualty I saw, which really set the tone of our attitude. Because remember, killing is something that you're trained not to do. The very first person that got shot out of a tree right outside of our headquarters was a Japanese captain. And he had a saber with him. He came out of that tree and he landed right in front of us. And so we went through his pockets and checked to get military information as fast as we could. Would you believe the very first picture I saw was USC, University of Southern California. I mean, that's a turnoff if there ever was one.
I think all of them were scared. Hell, I was scared. Everybody was scared. Anybody tells you they weren't scared is full of bull.
They would shoot off fireworks, and the fireworks would land behind you, and that would, you know, that scared the hell out of you because you didn't know whether they were behind you, in front of you.
If you heard some noise going out there and you guys didn't know the password, well, you just took a shot.
He said, I hear something. I said, I do too. And it was getting closer and closer, and we both fired same time. It was darker than the ace of spades. You couldn't see a hand in front of your face. And when daylight came, I could touch the bayonet of the Jap. He was laying there. And we didn't argue who hit him. And we didn't go look. I didn't anyway.
We were up against the Japanese Imperial 18th, I think it was the 18th Army. They had come all the way they went through China, all the way India, down through there, Burma, into the Philippines. They were good fighters, but they were ruthless bastards. They just got you just like with a bayonet, just as soon as anything.
They were very well trained, they were very clever, they were very well camouflaged. They used to come out of spider holes. You never know where they would be next.
They've been through this, you know. They had foxholes in machine gun pits, bunkers, and they had brains enough. They had been through it long enough. They choose the high ground.
They were up in the trees, and even if you shot in the trees and killed one of them, they wouldn't fall out because they strapped themselves in.
We were combat all the time.
Well, you don't sleep. You rest, but you don't sleep.
If you heard some noise going out there, if you guy didn't know the password, well, you just took a shot.
Lieutenant Johnson took a bunch of guys. They went out on a patrol. They came back and he said, "We lost Ray Evans." I said, "What happened to him?" He says, "I don't know. We lost him." And I think it was 2 or 3 days later at night, and Frank was snoring. I was stayed up watching guard, and this Ray Evans come to my hole. And I don't know how he got through by all the other guys that he didn't get shot. And I had my pistol cocked and aiming, and I could hear him coming closer and closer. And that Ray, he heard Frank snoring, and he says, "Ed." And I said to Ray, I raised that pistol, and I almost shot him. Boy, I cried, and I shook. Boy, that was the closest thing. I'd really feel bad if I did hit him.
I can remember my buddy, Joe Rivetta, in the foxhole next to me. He was a corporal at that time, my boss. He had 104 fever, and I took care of him, give us canteens of water, and try to give him food to eat.
If you had a temperature of 104, you stayed and fought. If you had a temperature of 105, you went back to the first aid station.
I got up to 103, and by that time, they just took me back to the first aid tent, or its canopy, and lay me down, and gave me 25 grams of quinine. And I took that, and I had practically delirious because of the quinine and the fever, and I lay there for 24 hours, and the fever broke, and I went back to the line. But we all did this that were left because they couldn't afford to send us back. If they'd have sent everybody back, we'd have been overrun and been annihilated.
And at times we had maybe 50 to 100 men on the front, on our flank. Most of them had malaria. They just had to sweat it out.
And at times we were fighting side by side with the Australians. Heck of a fighters, I'll tell you. Boy, those guys were real nasty. I'm glad they were on our side.
I was with the Aussies one time and on the line there, and the Japs had us pinned down, and I was firing at Thompson submachine gun, you know, and some of the ammunition wasn't worth a damn either. I was firing it, and all of a sudden it jammed. So I had to reach up like this and check that shell out. And as soon as I did, I had my finger on that trigger yet. And geez, the old bullets went, and it's Australian. He was looking over to see what's the matter with me. He said, Jesus, mate, he says, you almost knocked my head off. I said, what the hell are you doing standing up there for?
Someone sent a captain, a lieutenant, and a medic, and someone else, sergeant out of Grand Rapids, all killed trying to save a lieutenant. So the order came out, no more. Not too long after that, I was sent out on patrol, and on the way back, I just decided on my own, I'm going to check to see if I can find Lieutenant Horton. Well, I found Lieutenant Horton, but he had died. And he wrote a diary while he was dying. The next to last paragraph says something like this: I have a pistol with me, I could kill myself. I don't think God has that plan for me. And then he said, I now know how Christ fell on the cross.
Our battle wasn't going worth a darn. We were not trained, we weren't equipped right, we didn't have the food. We should have never been in that battle, because we weren't ready for it. We weren't jungle fighters.
This guy volunteered, given all the fire he could. He'd get up there and was going to drop a couple of grenades, or at least one grenade in behind him. And we did. Gave them all the firepower to keep their heads down. He went up, pulled the pin, threw it in the bunker. They picked it up, threw it back. It blew part of him away, and he's laying there moaning and groaning. I mean, hollering for help. There's nothing you can do.
The Japanese around us had advantage. They knew the territory. They knew they would get up in the trees, camouflage themselves. And the majority of our men that were wounded or killed were head injuries, because we didn't have helmets. The Japanese could pick us off whenever they wanted to.
MacArthur wanted to win a battle, and we weren't going that wood.
General Harding, who was our first general, wanted to pull the 32nd Division out, and he told MacArthur, these men have gone through too much to stay here.
And he didn't want us to go against the pillboxes and whatnot. We were getting slaughtered, and we were inexperienced to begin with. He sent General Eichelberger up, he was a 3-star general, and told him, he said, relieve the general that's up there. I want you to win this battle or don't come back.
We hit the Q9 grass, and we started across that. That's a grass that runs anywhere from 2 feet to 5, 6 feet tall. And it's sharp, it hurts, it cuts.
It's sharp as a razor. And if you don't watch yourself, you can cut yourself and make it bleed. I mean, it can make you bleed. And sometimes if you went through there fast, you come out of there with cuts all over your hands and face.
And we got about 1,000 yards into that when the Japanese stopped us. We fought and reached the swamp. We fought our way through the swamp. We got to Sandinana Track again, which was a higher ground. And it was a Japanese bivouac area, but we took that over and we spent the night there, or tried to. It was counterattacked all night.
And then that's when all hell broke loose. That's when we knew we were in big trouble. Some of the guys that walked in there never knew what hit them. We weren't in there maybe 3-4 minutes, and We lost quite a few guys. There was no screaming, there was no hollering. We were dumbfounded.
But we just kept pushing, and that's the only thing that saved us, because we were outnumbered about 7-1.
There was attacks day and night. We cut off their supplies, and they wanted that road back.
Sometimes he would sit there 2 days, 3 days before he could move, before they found out how to get through the line, how to surround them.
Through counterattacks after counterattack, we got low on ammunition, and the patrols tried to break through. They couldn't. We were actually lost. They didn't know where we were. They ran patrols till they finally found out where one section was. And they ran a patrol that broke through with radio, food, and more ammunition, because we were down to nothing.
And Eichelberger had no choice, but we realized it later, anybody that had any sense realized it later, that if we'd have stopped fighting and waited for reinforcements, that the Japs would have overcome us.
We knew we had to keep going. We couldn't get out of the roadblock. There was absolutely no way to get out. We had to keep going or give up, and we didn't want to do that.
It was kind of a semicircle around Buna. They call it a perimeter, and little holes in the line here and there that our units were able to break through, and eventually got to the ocean on either side. So then the Japanese literally had their backs to the ocean. And when they finally pushed them out of Buna, there was no place to go if they wanted to run away. They had jumped in the sea, jumped in the ocean. Some of them drowned in the ocean.
We finally won the damn battle. He told, MacArthur told the general, he says, take the sergeants and the corporals, make them officers. Take the officers that won't fight, relieve them.
But after 22 days in roadblock, the Australians broke through and relieved us. And the trail that they used to get through, they guarded that while we were going out. So we could walk out. We had to carry a lot of people out, but so those that could walk, walked, and those that could walk good enough and help the other ones, we managed to get out.
You have to remember, we were forced to face the Japanese Imperial Army is just like the Marine, their best division, never been defeated. Never any obstacle that they went to get, they were successful. And the 32nd Division was the first division that defeated them completely at every place we met them.
You had to hold the ground with what you had. Therefore, we took a terrible beating physically and in many other ways.
Well, it's a duty you have to perform. Very fortunate. I was very fortunate. I never was hit. I was shot at, but I never was hit. And I can be honestly say I can't remember ever killing them directly. I fired into the jungle like I was told to do or was supposed to do, but I never really walked up to a body and said, well, this is one I got. So by the grace of God, I got through the way I did.
Somebody, I don't know who it was, I cannot tell you, got me back to the first aid station. And the next thing I knew, I was on a plane flying back over the mountains. Took us 57 days going across, took us 45 minutes flying back.
We got back to Australia, there was only 10% of us left.
I ended up somehow, I don't know what happened to me, but I ended up in a hospital, a field hospital. And I had malaria bad, and it does knock you down and blanks you out.
I passed out, and I remember waking up in a field hospital in Townsville, Australia. They tell me that I was out for maybe 2 weeks.
The first group that went out had I think if I remember correctly, you had to have 88 points or something like that. And you got points by the time you were in service, the number of months you were in combat. Unfortunately, if you're in a hospital, that didn't give you 2 points. It only gave you 1 point. So I wasn't one of the first ones to get out.
The survivors of Buna recuperated in hospitals, or, if their condition were serious enough, were sent back home. Those that recovered were sent back to the line. The Red Arrow continued the push to secure New Guinea in major battles at Sador, Atepe, and Morotai. Red Arrow rejoined the Allied offensive to defeat Japan in the Philippines at Leyte, Luzon, and the Villa Verde Trail. Their final mission was the mopping up operations after MacArthur's return. The division was officially deactivated on February 28, 1946. The men that had gone to war as a group staggered home as individuals, sent back because of wounds, disease, or by accumulating enough wartime points to be discharged. Today, the Red Arrow Association keeps the memory of its members alive through meetings and reunions.
Well, when I arrived in Grand Rapids Depot, I was going to walk, and my legs were shaking. I couldn't walk, so I threw the old barracks bag on my back and I started running down the tracks. I was able to run better. I ran in the depot, and there was my mother and father, Virginia, my wife-to-be, and her family, all my relations and friends that were there waited for us to come. And
I looked around, cried, and I got home. And when my ma saw me, she cried, I cried. That was about it.
I met my mother at the door. My father was working. She called him, got him home, and I had a very good homecoming.
I went into a bar on Coldbrook in Ionia, Kelly's Bar, and I said, I'd like a shot and a beer. And the guy looked at me and he says, I can't serve you, you're not 21. I was going to be 21 in 4 days, February 4th.
I think of a lot of the good times we had too, the guys, I'm very fortunate. I met more people in my lifetime than anybody. And that's a fact. I had that privilege.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we all got along real well. I wish all them guys who were living and would come to our reunions, but heck, most of them are gone.
30 years later, we had a reunion. And I saw this guy, and geez, he looks familiar. And he come up to me, and he says, you remember me? And I knew who it was then. I said, you want me to shoot you? He said, just give me a big hug. And I talked to him. He's from Arizona now, and he's married and got 3 kids. And we sat the rest of the night there talking and shooting the bull. You wake up and you're still sweating. But and that's after 60-some years. But you never forget that. It's like a photograph back there, like a camera.
You never have friendship like this any place. The people you fought with, people you live with. We know each other better than their parents know them, or their wives, even till this day. You have a lot of faith in them, you have a lot of trust, you have a lot of respect.